Welcome to the Screenplay Lab. I'm your host, Jeff Barker. I'm a screenwriter, and this is a podcast where we study and appreciate the standalone beauty of the screenplay as an independent literary piece, not just a blueprint for the film. We take one screenplay, we break it down, deconstruct it, find out what's unique about it, what we love about it, and most of all, what we can learn from it. And this week, our screenplay is The Social Network by Aaron Sorkin.
You have part of my attention. You have the minimum amount. The rest of my attention is back at the offices of Facebook, where my colleagues and I are doing things that no one in this room, including and especially your clients, are intellectually or creatively capable of doing. Did I adequately answer your condescending question?
It's hard to believe this is a 15-year-old film. It's a 2010 classic, a real classic, because it's one of the most studied screenplays, and not just that, it's on a lot of lists as one of the top movies in the last 20 years. Directed by the amazing David Fincher, and is based on the book The Accidental Billionaire by Ben Mesrich. And it's unique because of its rapid and layered dialogue, this non-linear structure, making a legal deposition actually interesting. It explores ambition and betrayal and loneliness. And as you can imagine, it won a ton of awards during award season. Aaron Sorkin alone, he won an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. He won a Golden Globe for Best Screenplay. He won a BAFTA Award for Best Screenplay. That's how good it is. He also won a Critics' Choice Award for Best Screenplay. Overall, the film won 3 Oscars. It won 4 Golden Globes and 3 BAFTA Awards. So what film won Best Picture in 2011 at the Oscars? Do you remember? I didn't. I had to look it up. It's The King's Speech, another really good film. But it is one of the most studied screenplays in modern history, mostly because of Aaron Sorkin and his unique style. People interested to see how he pulled this off. And we're going to study it today. But first, as we always do, let's meet our screenwriter. And this one is one of the legends, Aaron Sorkin. He's 64 years old. He's a screenwriter, a playwright, a producer, now a director. You know about that. He's from New York, a New York guy through and through, youngest of 3 children. One of his siblings is a lawyer. The other is involved in the film industry somehow. I can't remember. And his mom was a teacher. His dad was a lawyer. He went to Syracuse in the 80s and he majored in theater, as a lot of our screenwriters do. He's fascinated in politics and history and sports, specifically baseball, my kind of guy. He's no longer married, and he has a daughter, Roxy, who's 25 and also a filmmaker. So the family business. Sorkin's one of these screenwriters where I can't really tell you a whole lot about him that you don't already know. He's sort of like a Stephen King in the literary world. Everyone who cares knows quite a bit about him. One thing that he does that's sort of unique nowadays, is sort of old school, is he writes out the screenplay as much as possible by hand before he ever gets to the computer. Uses legal pads, spirals, all that stuff. And it goes all the way back to the beginning, and we'll talk about that in a second. He's an intense writer. He's a blue-collar, punch-in, punch-out, everyday type of guy. Hours and hours of writing when he's on a project. Known for his rapid-fire dialogue. Characters talk over each other constantly. They finish each other's sentences. They cross-talk, multiple conversations going on at once. That's on high display in this screenplay as well as pretty much everything else he's written. Think The West Wing. And you can think The West Wing because he wrote The West Wing. Or at least he was the creator and the showrunner for the first 4 seasons, I think. And then he stayed on board as a producer. He's known for his walk and talk scenes, a lot of one-ers where he's following people, picking up bits and pieces of conversations. Although, to be fair, there's not a whole lot of that in this screenplay because of the characters being anchored in these depositions where they're across the table from each other. But you can still feel the pace where the dialogue is going in different directions all over, just beep, 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 like, rapid-fire stormtroopers. He's known for tackling moral, political, social themes that are basically character-driven. If you break down his full filmography and televisionography, I don't even think that's a word, you would see that he is interested in some of the same themes as all writers have themes that show up over and over again in their particular work. His are power structure, the burden of leadership, the cost of being a genius, ambition, and integrity. And when you mix all that together, you can come up with some really interesting stories. All right, so how did he get started as a screenwriter? So it's the late 80s, and he's in his mid-20s, working as a bartender at a pretty fancy little restaurant somewhere in Manhattan. He gets a phone call. This is pre-cell phone, so it's tethered somewhere, and he's pouring a drink, talking on the phone. That's how I envision it, right? And it's his sister. And she's telling him about something she's going through personally. She is a JAG lawyer. She's defending Marines who are accused of killing other Marines in Guantanamo. Interesting story, right? Well, this sparks an idea, and he starts thinking about a story, a play, and he writes it down on napkins, cocktail napkins, pieces of scrap paper. This is the legend anyway. And so he's working night after night. Anytime he has a few seconds, he's scribbling things on pieces of paper. Maybe he's going home at the end of the night and compiling it into one of his famous yellow legal pads. But either way, in the end, he comes up with a play called A Few Good Men. Somehow this play ends up on Broadway and explodes. And it is one of the most seen plays down there for quite a while. 500 performances overall on Broadway. So this makes Aaron Sorkin a respected playwright, and it gained him Hollywood representation on the film side. And his first task as a writer for Hollywood was to adapt this famous play that everybody was going to see in New York. And that's how we're all gifted the 1992 film A Few Good Men, starring Jack Nicklaus, Tom Cruise, and Demi Moore. Of course, that launched his career in Hollywood for sure, and he followed it up quickly with another film that he co-wrote, this time with Scott Frank. This was 1993, and it was Malice, a medical thriller starring Alec Baldwin, Nicole Kidman, Bill Pullman. 2 years later, back by himself as a writer, he wrote The American President, a romantic comedy drama starring Michael Douglas, Annette Bening. This one was directed by Rob Reiner, so some big hitters for sure, not that the other ones weren't. Then he got busy with television, and his first project in 1998 was to create a television show called Sports Night. And if you think back to 1998, this was the height of SportsCenter, and everyone was interested to see how that could translate to TV or film. And it was a great show, but I don't think it had enough viewers, probably female viewers at the time, although women love sports. I loved the show. I do remember it being very locker roomy though. And then that led to the 1999 project of being the creator and showrunner for The West Wing, one of the most beloved TV shows of the late 90s and early 2000s. And this really showed off Sorkin's style. Almost every episode was full of walk and talk, oneers, back and forth, multiple conversations, rapid speech, everyone talking over everyone else. Some of his characters had the same voice, but no one cared because it was so interesting, so intelligent, and the storylines were so tight. A very satisfying show. Not going to go into what all went down there, but he was running the show for 4 years and did, like I said earlier, stay on as a producer. And then he got back to the movies. In 2007, he wrote Charlie Wilson's War, which is an outstanding movie. And then followed that up in 2010 with The Social Network, which is the screenplay we're going to be breaking down today. Then he followed that up in 2011 with Moneyball, another great film and an outstanding screenplay. Maybe we'll break that one down one day. He had a co-writer on that one. That's based on the Michael Lewis book, Moneyball. Then back to TV for a few years. He did Newsroom, which was sort of a take between the Sports Night and the West Wing combined, and some brilliant acting in that show. Back to the big screen in 2015 with Steve Jobs, which if you remember at this time, there were multiple Steve Jobs films coming out. This one was the winner of the group. He won another Golden Globe for his screenplay. And then in 2017, he wrote and directed, this was his directorial debut, Molly's Game. That's a biopic about Molly Bloom. Then he did it again in 2020 with The Trial of the Chicago 7. He wrote and directed that one, which he also won another Golden Globe for. And just announced last week, the reason why we're breaking this film today, because we need to revisit it, because he is writing the sequel to The Social Network. Right now, the working title is The Social Network 2. I'm sure it'll be something different. But not only is he writing it, No Fincher this time. He's going to direct it. Some people are excited about that. If he has the whole project to himself, some people are like, whoa, wait a second. Part of the beauty of this film was the voice and the story of Sorkin and the camera and the structure on screen of Fincher. But we'll see how it turns out. I'm excited for it. It's going to be a huge, huge movie, you can imagine. And then also, he's in talks to possibly write another biopic, this time Lyndon B. Johnson. So we'll see about that. Busy guy. So how did The Social Network all come about? Here is the story. It is obviously based on the book, The Accidental Billionaires, that 2009 book by Ben Mesrich. But he got his hands on it by a producer named Scott Rudin, and Mesrich's agent sent it to Sorkin before it was even finished. And this does happen a lot when screenwriters are targeted to adapt. And he was intrigued by the betrayal of the friendships, the ambition, the class, the genius. And he said the story is sort of a modern Shakespeare tragedy with the consequences for everyone. Saw the writing on the wall of what Facebook was headed toward. But you can imagine how this story could be told a million different ways. But this is the way we got it, because we got Aaron Sorkin. And I think it was a great thing to get. Sorkin goes to work. He's doing his own research now. He's reading lawsuits and depositions and interviews, not just relying on the book. And he settles on a nonlinear structure, which was probably the secret sauce. And he wrote the first draft in about 3 months, he says. Again, most of that time by hand. I would just get cramps. I don't know. On his legal pads. Then he goes to the computer. And the dialogue is so finely crafted that almost every single word in the screenplay is in the film. There are things left out of the film that are in the screenplay, but nothing really that's said on the film is missing from the screenplay. Very little, if any, ad-libbing. Sony greenlit the project. David Fincher was brought on board to direct. And I mean, goodness, this is the guy that did Fight Club and Seven and Zodiac and Benjamin Button and Gone Girl. I mean, there's so many. He's amazing. And casting was on the hunt for skilled A-listers, but not just to use their name and their talent, but they specifically wanted actors who could handle this rapid dialogue, who could consume dense material, memorize it, and understand the discipline that it would take to follow it line by line. And they hit a home run with their cast. Jesse Eisenberg, of course, who we've studied on this podcast for his screenwriting. Andrew Garfield, who is an outstanding actor and having a little bit of a renaissance now. His career is really just taking off again to the next level. And Justin Timberlake, who knew? A very talented actor, of course, but known for his music. I should say originally known for his music. He's now a well-respected actor. It was shot over 3 months, starting in October of 2009 and around Boston and around Los Angeles. All the interiors were shot in Los Angeles. And Fincher, he is known for just take after take after take. Actors who sign on to work with Fincher know that it's going to be a grueling day, but at the end of the day, he's going to get the best out of them, or he's going to put them in a position for them to give their best. And there were some scenes in this film that took up to 99 takes. The average was, 30 to 50 takes per scene. And just tremendous amount of work to get what they got. The editing of this film was world class. In fact, it won an Oscar specifically for the editing. And then on top of that, the little cherry on top here, the score was done by the guys from 9 Inch Nails. So let's just have it all, guys. It's spare no expense. Despite all that, they did get it in at a $40 million budget, which, yeah, it's a lot of money, but for a movie, a project this big, it's kind of modest. And it banged at the theaters, $225 million at the box office for this film, and unknown amount of money for streaming and rentals, because remember, it came out in 10. People were still renting things. All right, let's break this bad boy down. And we always start with the logline. And the official logline of this screenplay is: a Harvard student, Mark Zuckerberg, creates the social network site that would become known as Facebook. He is sued by the twins who claim he stole their idea, and by the co-founder who was later squeezed out of the business. It's a long logline. Here's my go at it. I say A Harvard student creates Facebook, but as it takes over the world, he faces lawsuits from friends who claim he stole everything. Screenplay statistics, 163 pages. This one is a big one. 192 scenes. Runtime is 2 hours flat. That is 44 seconds per page and 1.2 scenes per page. And now for formatting, mechanics, and style. And this is the part of the podcast where we talk about the specific formatting that each screenwriter uses, how they teach us to read their own individual screenplays, and how each screenplay is a little different. And of course, Sorkin has his own style. And we start with Sorkin's tremendous use of transitions for every single scene. And this goes back, used to be the standard back in the day. You'd see this in all screenplays. Nowadays, you don't see it as much. Transitions are mostly used to be very specific about a visual, cinematic look that you're trying to get on the page. But he uses it every scene. The cut to, if it's just a standard scene, he's just saying cut to, cut to. Part of why the screenplay is 163 pages, if you took all the transitions out, I expect you probably could gain, 6 to 8 pages just doing that alone. But I mean, it doesn't really matter what his screenplay comes in at. So 137 times we have cut to, 19 times we have cut back to. Of course, we also have the fade in and the fade out. We have intercuts. On 20, we have a pre-lap, which this is what I was talking about earlier. You would see this quite a bit in more modern screenplays. This is a way, if, as a writer, you want to show, look, we want to start with a sound, a sequence before we actually see it. You would pre-lap that. He does that one time here. Another thing he does that is unique is that he capitalizes the names of characters every time that they show up in the screenplay, not just the first time. So throughout the screenplay, every action line, if a character is mentioned, capitalize. And we have another screenwriter that did that on a screenplay that we broke down here. Do you remember who that is? Robert Eggers is a screenwriter who does that quite a bit. Sticking with character names, another unique trait of Aaron Sorkin is that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes if he wants to give a name to a character, but they're really minor, they're not someone that you need to remember, especially in a story that has a lot of characters, you don't want to confuse the reader, he will put their names in brackets on the character tag. Good example of that's on 115, where we have the interns here. Out of the respect of the actor, we've talked about this many times on the podcast. If you can, it's always nice to give a character a name, just so that on their IMDb, on their credit, they'll be a person rather than intern or bartender, right? So here he does it. We see here that the two interns, it says intern brackets Eric. And then the other intern talks and it says intern brackets Ian. And then there are many ways to do this. Most screenwriters probably just put intern 1, intern 2, and don't worry about it. But if you're being nice and you want to give people names, there are ways to do it. Jordan Peele does it a different way. If you remember when we studied one of his screenplays way back, he will put in the action line, Eric and Ian, even if they're minor characters. And then when they come up as a character tag, he will just call them Eric and Ian. But this is how Aaron Sorkin does it. And this is what I love about this part of the podcast is we get to look exactly at how this screenwriter writes their screenplay. Sticking again with character tags, a unique formatting style that Sorkin uses is when everyone's talking at once, he puts all. This probably goes back to, like I've said, how the characters are always talking over each other. But in this case, we do see it quite a bit. Different groups, different times in the screenplay. If you want to see a good example of that, a good place to look is 16, 17, 18. This is, I don't really want to call it a montage, but this is a quick series of scenes where everyone around Harvard is starting to discover the Face Smash, the first website that Zuckerberg creates. And every time someone says, picking out a person that's the most attractive, God, this was so early 2000s, right? They would say, on the right or on the left, the person on the right is the hottest, the person on the left's the hottest. So it says all. And it's not just in one scene because we're going through the rapid scenes. So in each location, some people would handle that with the dual dialogue, but he actually does dual dialogue in a different way. instead of having two columns of dual dialogue, at least in this screenplay, and I think also in Moneyball, the way he does it, is he uses the slash. So here on 73, you can see what I'm talking about, where you have DeVay and Tyler talking. They're talking at the same time. So the character tag is DeVay/Tyler, rather than giving them two separate columns. This is extra interesting because they're not saying the same thing. It's not like they're both saying amen or whatever. They're not saying the same thing. DeVay is saying BS, so Tyler's saying not to us. So he also indicates that in the dialogue by putting it back to back with a slash. This is one you would benefit from seeing rather than hearing if you're listening to the podcast. But it is something that Sorkin does, and maybe it goes back to his TV days where characters were talking all the time, all on top of each other. But it's easy to understand, and that's the main thing, is that when you read the screenplay, you can get it, and then that is consistent. We like to break down the use of bold and underlining and italics because that is something that can be used in so many different ways. In this screenplay, he uses it sparingly for sure. In fact, the bold he only uses it for titles. So, for example, on page 9, we get the title, Harvard University, Fall 2003. Then down on page 10, we start going through the night. He's going to show us throughout the night as this thing is taking place. So we get the title, 8:13 p.m. So as these things show up in the screenplay, we get a good look of the bold. In fact, at the very end of the screenplay, and we'll go all the way down to the end here, we also have titles. You see there, title. And this is the sort of the biopic, like the story continues. They all live happily or unhappily ever after. So the title here says Cameron and Tyler receive a settlement of $65 million. Okay, so that's kind of happily ever after. And they signed a non-disclosure agreement, although apparently that was disclosed somehow since we know it. And as far as underlining, he's very old school. The only time you see it at all in the screenplay is during the dialogue when it's a specific word that he's trying to get across. This is the word that the character is hitting in this dialogue. Some actors appreciate that. Some actors don't like that. They want to discover that themselves, and that's fair. But Sorkin does it here. That's the only time in the screenplay that there's any underlining. And as far as italics, mostly it only shows up in the screenplay when someone's reading something, which is also very common. Although there are a couple of dialogue lines that are also in italics. I'm not sure why that is, but they were as well. And believe it or not, Sorkin did a little fancy drawing in his screenplay. If you look at page 15, 16 here, we get the equation that Eduardo wrote on the window that was used to sort the popularity of, as they were picking who was the hottest. So that's pretty modern for our old school screenwriter. And let's talk about Whitespace. How does this one look on the page? It's a mixture, you know. He does a great job throughout giving us a lot of white space with these really short action lines. In fact, there are sometimes pages and pages and pages of no action lines, which is pretty consistent with Sorkin's dialogue-heavy writing. But then when there's a scene that he really wants to describe, he will get in there and put a lot of paragraphs that are pretty thick. If you look at 124 and 125, this was when the twins are racing in the Olympic trials and they're talking to the prince. And it's a lot of information and a lot of 4 and a couple of 5-line paragraphs, which is no big deal, but they're back to back to back. So it's pretty dense. But even so, he breaks it up because he doesn't do his action lines as beats, as some screenwriters do, where every action line is a specific shot setup or beat. He's just telling a story, and he breaks up the paragraphs where it makes sense, both for flow and visually to keep you reading. And we see that here on 124 and 125. It's a lot of words, it's some thick paragraphs, but he's still breaking it up, hoping that we can easily get through that page. Going to pause here to just say how much I appreciate you watching and listening to this podcast. If you like this, please like, subscribe, comment, leave a review, all that stuff. It really helps me out a lot. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, you can always listen on the go wherever you get your audio podcasts and vice versa. I try to update regularly on social media, so please find me there if you're interested. And then also, you can always find out what's going on with me at my website, jeff-barker.com. All right. Thank you so much for being here, and let's get back to it.
Thank you for watching my dad's podcast.
Now to direction on the page, where we look at how the screenwriter uses specific directions, camera angles, camera instructions, editing instructions, and see how they do it, because it is a hotly debated topic among screenwriters, especially emerging screenwriters who want to focus on these rules. But what we see is that a lot of screenwriters do put some sort of direction on the page. Obviously, if you can write cinematically and not be so mechanical, makes for a better read. We can all agree on that. But sometimes you just want to be very specific about what you see in your head and how you envision it. And as a director, how you're going to direct it, or also if you're passing it off to a director, like in this case, how you would suggest that they consider doing it. And I was a little surprised by this one because, as many of us have done, years ago, I took the Aaron Sorkin masterclass of screenwriting, and some really good nuggets in there. Appreciated taking that class. And I remembered specifically him talking about just absolutely do not use direction on the page. And I was wondering if I misremembered that. So I went and looked it up again. Now you can find some of this stuff online. And I was specifically wondering about the we see, because, you've got the we see, we hear, we follow, those. And I was wondering, okay, maybe I misremembered he wasn't specifically talking about that. But he says in his masterclass, I looked it up, he says that we see is unnecessary clutter. By the nature of the medium, all action lines describe what the audience sees. Everything is what we see. Don't do it. It's redundant. It's a waste. So that was exactly what he said in his masterclass. So you know what's coming, right? A lot of we sees in this screenplay. Over 20 times he says we see, and then on top of that we have lots of we follow and we are, and then also us, to us, from us, being specific about us as the camera. We see lots of examples of that here on 45, plus on 42, and actually throughout the screenplay. And also he has lots of specific references to framing and cameras. On 52, we get a very specific reference to the camera. It says the camera surveys the scene as Mark slips through some functions to show Edward, and we see things that are now familiar: a photo, sex, a profile, a list of attributes, a poke application. You remember that on Facebook, the poke? I never knew what to do with that. On 148, we get an example of how he's talking about specifically the frame of the shot. We have here, it says, as Eduardo reads, we rack focus, that's very specific, to Mark, who is sitting at a computer with his back to Eduardo, focused on the work. And then we see Sean step into the frame and lean against the desk a few yards away. And then back to Eduardo, who's almost shaking. So he's orchestrating here exactly how he wants the shot to look on the movie. We also get a couple of push, pulls, pans on 56. It says he starts quickly scrolling and reading it, and we push in on his face as the blood starts draining away. So I know I'll get in the comments that Sorkin wasn't talking about him, the established screenwriter. He was talking about people taking the class, the emerging screenwriter. I rebuke that. This whole argument about that some people can do one thing, but if you're trying to break in the industry, you can't do that. But anyway, that's for you guys to debate. I like to provide the information. Now to the writing of this screenplay, and this is a pure joy to read Aaron Sorkin's writing, and a lot of things we can learn from and look at specifically here. The first I want to look at is this cold open hook. It's one of the best of all time. And I went back last night and watched this scene that I hadn't seen in years, and it is word for word. I mean, you could literally hold up the screenplay next to your TV and follow along, and it's word for word, including in the beginning when we start over black and you hear Mark and Erica talking, and then fade into the campus bar, and then the screenplay here gives us a description of Mark and Erica, and then it does something really surprising and bizarre. It actually tells us about the mood of the scene in the action line. It says The scene is stark and simple. And I don't think here he's talking about the scene as in the bar scene. I think he's talking about this scene that we're going to create here. This scene you're watching is a stark and simple scene. And it is. It's two people bang, bang, bang across the table from each other playing tennis. Volley, 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 spike. And that's what happens here. And it's this classic Sorkin dialogue that sets the tone for the entire screenplay. What's amazing about it to me is once we get past the introductions, we have 8 pages of dialogue, and there are only three action lines in 8 pages. And not only that, they're so small. They're 1-line action lines or half-a-line action lines. This is really all about the gamesmanship of dialogue, back and forth, back and forth. It's a really cool scene, and you should check it out if you haven't seen it in a long time. Here's some of it now.
Making a comment on your parents. I was just saying that you go to BU. I was stating a fact. That's all. And if it seemed rude, then of course I apologize.
I have to go study.
You don't have to study.
Why do you keep saying I don't have to study?
Because you go to BU. Want to get some food?
I am sorry you are not sufficiently impressed with my education.
I'm sorry I don't have a rowboat, so we're even.
I think we should just be friends.
I don't want friends.
I was just being polite. I have no intention of being friends with
I'm
you.
under some pressure right now from my OS class, and if we could just order some food, I think we should.
Okay, you are probably going to be a very successful computer person. But you're going to go through life thinking that girls don't like you because you're a nerd. And I want you to know from the bottom of my heart that that won't be true. It'll be because you're an asshole.
And while we're here, we'll look at these character introductions because there's some things we can pull from this and see if they hold up 15 years later. We'll start with Mark. It says Mark Zuckerberg is a sweet-looking 19-year-old whose lack of any physical intimidating attributes masks a very complicated and dangerous anger. He has trouble making eye contact, and sometimes it's hard to tell if he's talking to you or to himself. It's outstanding. And honestly, it's more of a description of Jesse Eisenberg than it is of Mark Zuckerberg. But it nails this character. And one of the things we want to do with our character introductions is put out some good bait for our actors. We want people to be interested in playing this character rather than just describing them physically, what they're wearing, what they look like. We want to go. This is your chance to give us some internalization, some interiority. You can get. This is where you do it, rather than in the scene where you're telling us something that we can't see. Here you can do it. You can tell us about this character. Who is this person? You get a little 2 or 3 line freedom here to dive into the psyche, and it's important because you want an actor to read that and say, "Yep, I can embody that. That's who I've been wanting to play. I've been looking for this character." All right, let's see how he does here with Erica. It says Erica, also 19. So notice he doesn't do the parentheses with the age. He writes it out like sort of in a prose style. It says Erica, also 19, is Mark's date. She has a girl next door face that makes her easy to fall for. At this point in the conversation, she already knows that she'd rather not be there and her politeness is about to be tested. Okay. I don't know if this one holds up 15 years later. It's obviously good writing, but now I think if he wrote this, he wouldn't focus so much on her face, and he probably would have dove more into the complexity of this character rather than just her being polite. Because she's not a one-off character. She shows up again later in the screenplay, and she's the beginning stimulus to this. This is what kicks off the evil empire of meta, this rejection. Although, to be honest, this didn't happen. This did not happen. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg was dating his longtime girlfriend before coming up with or stealing the idea of Facebook, and they were together for a long time. They may still be together. No, I think he's single now. I don't know. I don't keep up with billionaire gossip, but I do know that this didn't happen. But that's okay. Biopics are giving us character-driven stories so that we understand the specifics of what happened, and that's what took place here, and makes for a very interesting scene. The point here that Sorkin's trying to make is that Zuckerberg was not the person he wanted to be. He was not the popular person that was being courted by all these clubs in Harvard, and he struggled with that. He struggled with his self-identity, with his self-awareness possibly, but he was also a genius. And that combination can be dangerous, as he says in the character introduction. And anytime someone can play a dangerous character, that's a win. If there's anything that you can take specifically from Sorkin, it's this next thing, that you have to have conflict in every single scene. If there is a scene that is just moving plot forward, take it out. Find a way to redo it. Try to find a way to add conflict. Sorkin does this. I mean, what did I say earlier? 156 scenes? I guarantee you there's 156 pieces of conflict in every scene. A good example of that is page 87, 88, where Sean discovers Facebook. Sean is the character played by Justin Timberlake, the guy who started Napster, and he sort of like bullies his way into being involved with Facebook. And while his girlfriend or his female friend is showering, he discovers this on her laptop and he wants to know more about it. Like, how does she get in it? You know, because in the beginning with Facebook, you had to be invited. And he has no patience. And so this scene could have been written 100 different ways, because the whole point of the scene is really just him discovering Facebook. That's it. So if I told you, write a scene where this guy Sean discovers Facebook, 100 people could give me 100 different scenes. But how many of those scenes would have conflict? Here he throws in conflict simply just by throwing in a snake. So if you can't think of anything, throw a snake in there. Here in the scene, Sean's trying to get her attention to ask her questions. She's ignoring him. She can barely hear him. She's in the shower. He's like, Amy. She's like, what? Yeah, what? Can you come out here just a second? She's not moving fast enough for him. So Sean says, there's a snake in here, Amy. She's, what? And Amy grabs a towel, jumps out of the shower. Where? Stumbles into the room, and there isn't a snake. But this is something Sorkin threw in there, a little conflict, a little elevated drama, just to get through the scene. So it's not just this guy finding Facebook. The point is, conflict comes in lots of flavors. It's not just arguing and screaming at each other. So this is where you got to find your conflict. Because remember, from my days as an old high school English teacher, there's internal conflict and external conflict. This other one's a good example of using internal conflict, but making it visual so that we can all see it externally. And he adds this to a scene. This is on page 56 when Diva discovers that he's been betrayed and this website called The Facebook exists. So he's at a gathering. I think it's some sort of chorus group that's playing at Harvard. He's there with his girlfriend. She's on her computer, won't get off, and he notices the Facebook. So that's the whole point of the scene. The whole point of the scene is to show each one of these characters in their natural element when they discover or learn about Facebook. Mission accomplished. He saw it, and obviously he's not happy about it. But Sorkin adds the conflict here. So as Diva shuts the laptop, he grabs it off the table, he puts it back. People are starting to turn because of all the commotion and see what the commotion is about as the singing continues. So I was right, it was singing. And KC, his girlfriend, says, what's wrong? Diva starts to bolt out of the pub. His foot gets caught on a chair and he falls hard, face first, to the floor. It's fine, he says. He starts out again, then comes back for his coat because he forgot his coat, grabs it, starts out, falls down again as he's leaving, and then he runs out of the building. So this is the little things. This is how you polish a screenplay, by adding conflict in every scene. So the conflict there is internal, him struggling with his balance and being able to control his emotions and try not to make a scene. It's also external because this is an event where people are supposed to be quiet and watch this group sing, but he's making such a commotion. So that's the conflict. My favorite conflict in the screenplay is page 149, 150. This is one of the most famous scenes in the movie where Eduardo discovers that he's been betrayed by Mark and his shares have been cut down to nothing. And he barges in to confront him. And there's not only internal but external conflict here. Let's check it out.
Mark! Mark!
He's wired in.
Sorry?
He's wired in.
Is he?
Yes.
How about now? You're still wired in?
Call security.
You issued 24 million new shares of stock.
You were told that if new investors
How
came
much
along...
were your shares diluted? How much were his?
And that pacing and tone that Sorkin keeps up in his screenplays where the characters are constantly moving and the flow is going, going, going. How does he pull that off? Well, he does it with very specific action lines, but he also relies on the word as. Good example of that here is page 9. This is Mark going back to Harvard Square, and you can see here, as Mark continues on, he passes a group of people heading in the opposite direction. As Mark's steady and determined stride continues, he'll pass by all kinds. Then go down to the next, we have the Harvard, the Kirkland house, and then it says, as the music continues and Mark busts into the lobby of his dorm. So I see that he does rely on that a lot to be like, as this is happening, and it just keeps everything moving. This is this forward pace by Aaron Sorkin. There are no montages in Sorkin screenplays, at least the ones that I've read, but he does get through the scenes very quickly. Just sometimes the scene is just cut to, this is what's happening. Cut to, this is what's happening. You can see on page 17, 18, 19, this is when everyone is discovering about the face smash, and you get cut to another dorm room at night, 2 male students and a laptop. And this is where we were talking about earlier, where this is everyone saying on the left, on the right. But if you look at 18, look at that. I mean, we've got like 9 or 10 scenes in one page or 1.5 pages here, where it just goes to different locations. Cut to, keeps it moving. And that on top, you contrast that to some of these scenes that are 10, 12 pages long of just thick dialogue. That's the style. This nonlinear style that he uses was pitch perfect for this type of story, this type of screenplay, because had he just gone in chronological order, you would have missed out. You wouldn't have been able to see the story layered through different characters' motivations and get their side of the story. And not just that, I think what made it an award-winning screenplay is how it was almost like a joke where you have a setup and then the punchline, setup, punchline. So he would be in one part of history, maybe 3 years in the future, where someone will ask a question and then a character will give a hint, and then they will go back in time and answer that question. And then transition back. Then they would say something and leave us sort of hanging. We'd go back to the deposition 3 years in the future, or however far it was. And that would fill us in on what they were talking about. And so you're going back and forth is, again, a lot like comedy writing. We'll go back to that video we watched earlier and pick it up there, and you'll see what I'm talking about when Eduardo is pointing out how he got squeezed out of the money.
Your shares diluted. How much were his?
What was Mr. Zuckerberg's ownership share diluted down to?
It wasn't.
What was Mr. Moskowitz's ownership share diluted down to?
It wasn't.
What was Sean Parker's ownership share diluted down to?
It wasn't.
What was Peter Thiel's ownership share diluted down to?
It wasn't.
And what was your ownership share diluted down to?
0.03%.
You signed the papers.
You set me up.
You're gonna blame me because you were the business head of the company and you made a bad business deal with your own company?
Another reason I think he chose this style is because in a story like this, it's easy to lose the thread when you have so many characters and things happening at one point in history that don't pay off until later. So, I mean, yes, you could be a sophisticated viewer or reader and you can, okay, I remember that. Yeah, I remember that conversation. But if you could put them back to back, now you have the conversation, then you see the betrayal back to back, you can understand that part of the story and then move on. And so you're digesting this big story in little chunks, like little bites, rather than chronologically where you have all these setups and then they pay off later, but then maybe you forgot about one of the setups, so it doesn't make sense or it doesn't have the same impact. And I think that's what he was going for. One of the things I was sort of surprised about, that Sorkin talks to us, the reader, quite a bit in the screenplay. Many, many times he lets us in on what's going on, talking directly to us. First example is on page 22 when he is introducing us to Marilyn, the attorney, and it says that she is a pleasant, pretty, professional, young contemporary of Mark's named Marilyn that we'll get to know. So he's telling us this is not a throwaway character. You'll get to know her as you go through the screenplay. On page 26, he's setting up the deposition for the first time, and he's letting us know, strap in, because we're going to be back and forth a lot. He says here, in fact, he says, we'll be back and forth between the two deposition rooms a lot. He just puts it right out there. He's talking to you, the reader. On page 65, he's setting up the scene in the classroom, and he says, we'll hear the speaker, but we'll only get to see him in a slightly blurred image as our attention is on Mark and Eduardo. So he's saying, your attention is going to be on these characters, not the teacher. On page 22, the first time we see Zuckerberg in the future, it says, it's 3 years later, and Mark is sitting with his lawyers at a large conference table. Mark is wearing a hoodie, sweatpants, and Adidas flip-flops, a personal uniform that we'll come to understand. And while it may take us a while to notice it, Mark's a different person in these flash-forward scenes. So, talking to us directly. And on page 76, when Erica makes her reappearance, it says that she is the character from the first scene in the screenplay. It tells us, hey, this was the old ex-girlfriend, in case you didn't, you don't recognize her. Sorkin also, many times in the screenplay, will tell us things that can't be shown on the screen. Like we talked about doing it in character introductions. He does do it outside of that throughout the screenplay. One example is on page 29, where we're back in that classroom again, and it says Mark is in the operating systems class. This is considered the hardest class at Harvard, and Mark is one of the 50 students with their laptops open. So it's good to know this is the hardest class at Harvard, but there's no way of showing that, and really it's irrelevant. But he wanted you to know it, so he put it in here. On page 11, when he's setting up the scene at a club downtown, he says that a bouncer, a townie in a tuxedo and a headset, is manning the velvet ropes that guard the thick wooden red double doors that lead to, believe it or not, one of the most exclusive clubs in the world. So he thought it was important for us to know that this is one of the most exclusive clubs, but he's telling us that it's not something you can show on camera. Rather than, you can see it's a fancy club, but you don't know that it is one of the hardest clubs to get into in the world. And I still don't know, but I believe him. And this is the third week in a row that we've had the side comment in the action lines. First, it was Ari Aster, who's the master of that. He has hundreds and hundreds of side comments, thoughts that the character is having independent of what's being said by the dialogue. Drew Hancock also last week in Companion, he did it quite a bit, not as much as Ari Aster. Here we get it one time from Aaron Sorkin on page 51. It says, Mark just keeps looking at him, barely even blinking. Quote, why am I being interrupted? So he's wanting us to specifically know what this look from Mark means. This look from Mark means, why are you bothering me? Why am I being interrupted? He does it with a double dash and quotation marks. Aster and Hancock do it with italics, but it's here. I thought it would be worth pointing out. And we always like to look to see how screenwriters handle music in their screenplay, because think about what we're creating here is visual. It has to stimulate all of the senses, what we see, what we hear, what we feel, touch, smell. And so music's a big part of films. Some screenwriters are very specific about this song, these lyrics. If you look at, for example, Trey Edward Schultz, who did Waves, and he has the new Weekend film that's coming out later this summer. He puts the lyrics in there, and he intertwines the lyrics with his screenwriting. And it's very specific about this part of the song is hitting when this is going on. Some screenwriters will be specific about the song and the artist. Here, though, is the more classic example from our screenwriter today, Aaron Sorkin. On page 9, we get the pulsing intro of a song crashes in that will take us through the following sequence. And then we go to the next scene, and then it says the music continues, and a little bit later on, it says the music is out. On 44, at the top of the page, it says music kicks in that will tie this next section together as we cut to interior Mark's dorm room night. Since we just read that, it gives us the opportunity to talk about how he sometimes writes into the scene heading. This is something screenwriters debate. Some do it, some don't. Where one school of thought is you want each scene to stand independently. You want it to end with a period and it's over. Some will use the ... to take you to the next scene. Here he writes into the scene heading. He's saying in his action line that this section will take us to where? To Mark's dorm room at night. And now we'll look at his voice, which is a beautiful thing. Some examples. 126, this is when the twins just lost a rowing competition and Cameron doesn't want to talk. And it says, Cameron is thinking about starting a war with Monaco right now. So he lets his brother do the talking. Page 37, at the Jewish fraternity Caribbean party that they're having in the middle of winter, it says that the party is about as lame as it sounds. What's important is that this couldn't be less like the final club party we saw at the beginning if they were playing pin the tail on the donkey. Page 89, it says, the president's office is one of the 2 oldest university buildings in the country, and the secretary sitting at the desk is even older. You get the sense that she thinks Harvard would be a better place if it weren't for all these students. So the writing is chef's kiss, of course, and it's important in your screenwriting to find ways to put your style, your voice in there, because you're not writing an instruction manual. You're writing a literary document that is alive. Yes, it's never finished. It's always changing, but you have to have your voice in it, or then why are you writing it? Anyone could write it.
Thank you for watching my dad's podcast.